So my name's Amanda Hall. I'm the Senior Director of National Campaigns over here at Dream.org. I'm so excited that you all have joined us for this Lobby Day training. We have some pretty big objectives for our workshop today, for what we're going to be doing, the reason you're spending your precious time with us. So, first, we want to make sure that you come away with an understanding of the Public Health is Public Safety lobbying platform. So I'm going to mention the bills that we're going to be lobbying on, but my amazing colleagues are going to go into even more depth. So we're going to be talking to our elected officials about the Reentry Act, a piece of legislation that could really help save so many lives of folks that are reentering society after incarceration. This legislation would allow Medicaid 30 days prior before leaving, and can really, like I said, save lives, change trajectories, and we'll be going into that deeper later. Also, the Clean Slate Act. Clean Slate Act is a bill that allows folks to have their records expunged. In the federal system right now, there isn't a good outlet to do that. We know a lot of states have made strides, but this would really help our folks that we love so dearly that's been through that federal system truly get a second chance. We'll also be advocating for the Fair Future Act, a bill that removes language that's in federal statute that you can actually turn down housing to a person just because they have been convicted of a drug crime. So that really puts up these horrible barriers for people in recovery, people who have had different drug related charges. And also, we are going to be telling our elected officials, members of Congress, how important Medicaid is, how it saves lives, reduces overdoses, and keeps our community safer. Again, you'll hear about these more a little later, but we want to make sure by the end of this, you know those policies, you feel pretty comfortable with them. Also, we want to make sure that everyone joining the upcoming virtual lobby day and or because once we get you once you're stuck with us forever, we always want you to be involved for future advocacy visits, that you feel more prepared and you know the fundamentals of what it means to advocate, what it means to meet with your elected officials. And having you all from all around the country is so impactful because people want to hear from their constituents. That's who votes them in office. That's the communities that they serve. So I love seeing all the different states in the chat and super excited to get to know some of you all better. Next slide, please. So I wanted to review our agenda, what our time will be like together. So in just a minute, we're going to kick it off strong and have a breakout, have some breakout rooms, and we'll be doing some, hopefully getting to know the folks that you're in the room with and just setting the tone for our time together. We're also going to talk more about the campaign, about public health as public safety. We're going to have a really amazing, it's like my favorite advocacy training from my colleagues, Josh and Candia. And then we're also going to get even more in depth about those bills and policies that I talked about earlier, because those are the things that we're going to be focusing on for our lobby day. Then we get a practice. We're going to do some mock lobby meetings. Watch out, I'm going to be an elected official and I'm no joke. So be prepared to win me over. And then we're going to get out of here at 7:30 Eastern to give you all the rest of your evening. And then on April 9th, we'll be ready to make a difference together. And I will pass it over to Harrison. Thank y'all again for being here. Yeah, so the Public Health is Public Safety campaign was launched back in August, August 29th. So we haven't been around for that long, but we've done this work for a while. We just officially started a campaign because we were fighting across the nation. Bad bills were passing, overdose deaths were rising, and people continue to be incarcerated at very high rates. So we do a lot of state work. We work in states across the nation, Arizona, Arkansas, Wisconsin. We have our health and justice advocates. But today we're really going to focus on that federal aspect. But I do want to make sure that people know that federal isn't all we do. So if you want to get involved in the campaign and you are in a state or interested in something local, let us know. We have a spot for you. And really, our background covers these three kind of corners. So we look at care in the community. How do we build more resources? How do we make sure that we expand medical and mental health services, expand treatment, try to decriminalize these laws around people who use drugs, people in recovery, and even improving community crisis response. How do we make sure it's social workers going out to help when there's a crisis? Also, we work on care for people who in the community and people who are incarcerated. So we really push for good programming. Also, while a person is incarcerated, comprehensive programming and reentry resources. And we really try to fight back around probation and parole regulations that incarcerate people more often instead of giving them a chance at other resources. And so yeah, I covered those. Sorry, Harrison. I'm going fast, but yeah, it does all of those things. And also, our last kind of bucket is all around care after reentry when people get home. How do we make sure that they reintegrate into society? How do we make sure that we're eliminating all of these barriers people have due to a criminal conviction? How do we make sure they have housing, food assistance, or able to get an education? So we work on a lot of different things in a lot of different places. So again, you all join the campaign, whether you're interested in the state level, federal level, local. I bet we can find something for you all to do. For sure, we can find a way to get you involved. And yeah. There we go. And today it's all about the federal level. We're going to talk about those federal priorities I mentioned. On the federal level, we promote good bills and try to get people involved, and we fight bad ones. We fight ones that continue to criminalize folks who we care so deeply about. Then lately, there's been a lot going on. The halt fentanyl bill passed, which brought in new mandatory minimums. So people will be incarcerated for longer times. Also, it really put a hamper on us trying to test and find out more things about fentanyl analogs. Yeah, so that was disappointing. And also, we're hearing a lot of rumblings in the news and all over social media about that there may be a new executive order declaring fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction, which always is scary around more criminalization. We just really want to focus on helping people. If we took the same amount of energy and money and time and focus and use that to give people resources and support they need, man, what would our world look like? And that's what this campaign's all about. I did want to highlight our amazing health and justice ambassadors. They'll be helping us during our lobby day. A couple of them are on here, but we just want to show you again how people get involved in the campaign, how much our ambassadors, volunteers, members mean to us. We really want to do this with y'all. So I'll pass it on over for y'all to learn the important stuff.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say this is, I mean, the only important stuff. I think all this stuff is pretty important. My name is Josh Ho. I'm the Senior Policy Manager at dream.org, and I do a lot of lobbying. So that's probably why you're stuck with me for a while here to talk about lobbying. Can you go to the next slide? So there are really two parts of this training. The first part is about preparing to be in meetings, legislative meetings, and the second part about it is about what a legislative meeting looks like. And so, what is lobbying? Well, before we kind of go to this definition thing, there's probably some negative perceptions about lobbying. Lobbying can be bad or good. I usually suggest that there's a difference between citizen lobbyists and not-for-profit lobbyists. These are folks who work for a cause, and some of the more hired gun type lobbyists, although I like a lot of the hired gun type lobbyists who work for, whatever, for lots of what are called multi-client lobbyists. There are a lot of amazing people doing that work too. But lobbying can get a bad name, I suspect, because there are some lobbyists who work for causes that many of us might think are gross. However, everyone in this chat and everyone in this webinar is working to try to make the world a better place. So when we say lobbying here, we're talking about something positive, I hope. So the definition on the screen is definitely true, that lobbying is communicating legislative priorities and having impact on the legislative process. That sounds great and it's very true, but what is it really about? Constituent lobbying is an opportunity for you to tell your elected officials or their staff what you care about. It's one of your only opportunities to do that. This is not about simply voting. We always talk, voting is really important and voting can say a lot about what you believe in, but this is your opportunity to actually speak to the people that you elect and tell them what matters to you and what will inform your votes in the future. Your leverage with your legislators is that you can vote for or against them. You are leveraging the power of your vote to directly influence the legislative process with your own legislative representatives. The next slide, please. What is our flex? Have you built the power? What does that mean? Well, how do you build power? Marshall Gans, one of the most legendary organizers, defines it like this: organizing is leadership that enables people to turn the resources they have into the power they need to make the change that they want. So in other words, you want something. Organizing is leadership that enables people to turn the resources they have, what's around you, the people, the places, the things, into the power you need to make the changes that you want. Mr. Gans says that there are 5 keys to the practices of organizing: telling stories, building relationships, structuring teams, strategizing, and acting. And we'll talk about all those things at different points during this thing, but that's just kind of like how you look at this at the beginning. When we say, what's your flex, what's your power, it can be anything from just that you're a voter walking into an office all the way to you've organized a bunch of people and you have a bunch of things together and you have your stories and you're ready to walk in and things like that. And that's kind of what we're trying to prepare you for. Through the process of engaging in these activities, we're trying to teach you how to build legislative power, not just power in general, but specifically legislative power. Next slide, or next, yeah. So why should your political representatives listen to you? Well, first and foremost, they will listen to you because you have the power to vote for them or against them. But you also have the power to organize voters in their community, friends, family members, community connections, and you can also organize them to have influence with that legislator or whatever. And that's why they should listen to you. Your actual power, your basic power, is that you're a voter in their district. Your latent power is that you know other voters in their district and have identified yourself as an organizer, which means even in the interaction with that legislator or that staff member, you're communicating that you have both the power of a voter and the latent power of an organizer. Next slide. So now we're going to switch the gears a little bit, and these are kind of 5 truths about kind of how you approach the idea of engaging in the legislative process. The first one is lobbying is a political process to move policy initiatives. Well, it's important to understand the political process. That's one of the things that this is talking about. There's not really time in this webinar to go through the entirety of the legislative process, but as anyone knows who's ever met me before, you can hit me up at any time and I'll talk your ear off about how the legislative process works. That's something we do lectures about, but this is not really the time to go too deeply into this. But as you are growing your own power, sit down with people in your state or in your place or who've done federal work before, if you're doing federal lobbying, and, who understand the legislative process and learn as much as you can. This is a process of learning more as you go along. I've been doing this work for a long time, and I still learn new things every week, and I try to search out people who know more than I do in the different areas of the work that I do. The goal of doing lobbying work is to move or halt uh, policy initiatives, etc. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the second one. Next thing. Government is in the business of picking winners and losers. Uh, Everything in government is competitive. Legislative sessions have beginnings and ends. There's only time for a certain number of bills to go through and get passed in any particular session. Every step of the legislative process is about picking which bills are heard, which bills will get voted on, and ultimately which bills pass and which bills don't. The point is not to introduce legislation, it's to pass legislation. In a world where there's competition and many bills are suggested every year and only a few will pass, learning the process is really important. For instance, last year when I was working in Missouri in the 2024 session, I think outside of funding bills, only 8 total bills passed in that entire legislature. That's 8 bills in one entire session. You think there's probably 400 or 500 bills at least that are introduced every year. 8 of them passed. Last year, the US Congress on the federal level passed the fewest bills they'd passed since the early 80s. It was one of the most ineffective Congresses in terms of passed legislation ever. So there's high competition to pass a small number of bills. And what you're trying to do is become a change agent that pushes one of your bills to the forefront of that process. As I said, many bills get introduced, few bills get passed. We're in the business of trying to figure out how to make a bill win, and lobbying is part of the process of moving a bill from something that gets talked about to something that gets moved. That's what we're trying to do. Next slide. All politics is local. I believe this was originally attributed to a former Speaker of the House in the House of Representatives in DC, Tip O'Neill. But basically, the idea is that legislators respond almost exclusively to people who can vote for them. Legislators care about how they're perceived in general, but they care most specifically and deeply about how they're perceived by people in their district. You'll hear me say this many times today, but the most valuable member of any group of people you're taking to lobby a legislator or their staff is the constituent, the person who actually has the power to vote for or against that particular legislator or the legislator that the staff represents. It is increasingly hard, both at the state and federal level, to even get appointments to meet with legislators unless you have a constituent with you. It's every bit of the power that you generate starts at the local level, and that's where the most power for a specific legislator exists. Next slide. A decision to get out of politics does not divorce you from politics and its impact on you. I think almost all of us have probably experienced this pretty recently. Many people in nonprofits and non-governmental organizations all across the country woke up around a month ago, to find out that the administration was freezing all funds. So all the plans everyone had made for everything we're going to do over the next year were put on hold because they put a funding freeze on basically all of those funds. If you participated in politics or not, that impacted you. A lot of these things that are happening to real people, regardless if they were involved in the politics of how those things happened or not. Not being involved in the political process directly does not mean you're free from the impact of politics on your life. My personal opinion is it's better to be involved in the politics so that you at least have some influence over the things that are going to impact your life. Next slide, please. Relationships are paramount. Get to know your politicians. This is probably the thing people hear me say the most ever, is that politics is a relationship business. Who you know matters. Getting to know people matters. Having relationship and having trust with the people you have relationships with is incredibly important in politics. When I'm mentoring people, I try to get them to walk the halls of the legislative building that they go to the most. If they're in Wisconsin, Missouri, Michigan, wherever I work, I try to get them to drop in, meet the staffers, reconnect with the staffers whenever they can, get their cards, email them, create relationships that actually are where they start to recognize you and you always recognize them. Always be making and deepening relationships. Building relationships and building trust with legislators and their staffers is the best way to build power over time in a legislature. So you have the level of building power, which is getting people behind you and people power and people with a particular legislator to bring to that legislator. And then you have the second level of power, which is having the relationships in the legislator so that they'll listen to what you have to say, or they'll invite you in to hear what everyone else has to say. And you're trying to kind of build both of those levels of power. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now that we have your head state about what is we're trying to do and what lobbying is, how do you get ready for an actual meeting? Well, this first thing, be Denzel Washington, Tom Hanks, or Viola Davis. Well, I don't think we literally mean try to be someone you're not. You always want to be essentially who you are. You have to be yourself. The thing that'll connect you to other people is being who you are. But if you were, say, if you were Denzel Washington, when you're walking into a legislative office, you want to be the Denzel Washington from The Great Debaters, not the Denzel Washington from Training Day. If you're Viola Davis, you want to be the Viola Davis from the movie Air, not the Viola Davis from The Woman King. I mean, not that there was anything wrong with the Viola Davis and The Woman King, just that you don't want to walk into the office with your sword out starting to try to attack folks. You want to be your most professional version, the best version of yourself. So yeah, know your congressperson. You can't always know the person you're going to meet with, and most often it'll be a staffer and not the congressperson themselves. But you can know where the congressperson is, how the congressperson is voted on issues like the one you're supporting. You can know what their campaign promises were. You can know what they've been saying in the district, because there's usually you can see that on television, etc. Once you know what office you're meeting with, do some research on them. Use the Google machine. Try to find reasons for them to agree with you. Find areas of common ground, like try to find things that they believe in that works with what you're working on, so that you can bring the two together and find common ground. Next slide. Yeah, look for common ground as you repair. I just talked about that one. Next. Okay,
Josh,
connecting is important.
Josh, if I may add here,
Yeah.
when we say be prepared, what we really mean is when we talk about Denzel Washington, Viola Davis, and Tom Hanks, is that they come to their roles prepared. They do the research. They show up and are ready to perform. And so, no, you don't want to come with your swords or being the bad guy, but you certainly want to come to the table prepared and having done your research.
Sure. Yeah. So the next one is connecting is important. Remember, you're building a relationship. You want to be able to connect with them again. You want them to remember you, and you want to be able to call on them again. Make sure you get their contact information and follow up. Never leave an office without getting cards. That's like, it'll have all their contact information in them. It's very important to always have all the cards from the people so that you can contact them again. Next slide. All right. Be genuine and natural. I think I talked about this at the top. Remember to be that you want to be the best version of yourself. Kind of my interpretation of the Hanks and Denzel and Viola was that you want to be yourself, but be the best version of yourself. And I think Candy is right that part of that best version should be a prepared version, but it should also be a professional version. But at the essence, you have to be you. The thing that's going to connect you to someone else is you. I've seen people go into offices and try to act like something they're not, or try to be someone they're not. Just be yourself at the base of all of this. Next. Okay, now we're there. All right. So when you're going into offices, you'll use, at least in this particular example, what we're going to be doing in a couple of weeks, you won't actually physically be going into offices. You'll be virtually going into offices, but you're going in as a team. In our experience, and really with most organizations that I've been involved with, meetings with legislators are a team effort that's set up almost always in some version of this same kind of configuration. You're going to have a team leader, you're going to have constituents and storytellers. Sometimes the constituent is the storyteller. Sometimes you have multiple constituents who are storytellers. Sometimes you have one constituent who's a storyteller and some other storytellers. But basically what they're going to do is explain their connection to the issue, what drives them to want to move this piece of legislation to be passed. And then you're going to have a note taker. And sometimes you do double duty. Sometimes someone will be both a storyteller and a note taker. Sometimes it's rarely a team leader and a note taker, because the team leader has a lot of other kind of chores, but those are your basic kind of what the different team parts are. Yeah, the one thing I will say also is that the team leader is usually the person who has the most expertise on the piece of legislation you're discussing. And I mean that in a policy sense, knows the kind of ins and outs of the legislation, knows the answers to a lot of the questions that might come, et cetera. That's usually how you assign who the team leader is. And then the rest of the team kind of is based on if they're constituents, if they have a story, things like that. Next slide. Oh, that thing, I think it's only supposed to have one of those, but all right. So the first one on there is everyone is important. When you walk in, be pleasant to everyone. Remember to wait for your whole group. Everyone in the office and everyone in your group is important. All staffers are important, even the ones you're not meeting with. Try to meet the office. I call it meeting the office. Try to meet everyone you can meet. Try to get a relationship, as many relationships as you can. Once you're in the meeting place, they'll usually either take you into a conference room or they'll take you into the actual office, and there'll be a table in there or something like that. The group leader should start by thanking the legislator or the staff member for their time. Then you're going to kind of either the group leader will introduce everyone or they'll ask everyone to introduce themselves, and then they'll kind of give an overview of the agenda, which usually is something like and just so you know, most legislative meetings last between 15 and 20 minutes, so they move pretty quickly. So all of these parts have to happen kind of like boom, 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 boom. And so there's, it's a process. You'll get used to it. We'll practice it later, but it's a pretty, things happen pretty quickly. You're going to introduce. So an agenda might say something like, we're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to then quickly summarize the issue you're going to be lobbying for. And then we're going to have one or several of your constituents share with you. And then we're going to allow some times for question before wrapping up. So you kind of just have a basic, just quick kind of what are we going to do in the meeting? And then you kind of go and do the things that you said you were going to do. Then you're going to kind of turn it over to the constituents / storytellers. One of the things that some people like to say is that data kind of protects your position, but personal stories sell your position. So people's personal connection to the issue often is what moves people. And so storytelling is very important in this place. Then, at the end, you're going to kind of make the case for the bill, and you're going to ask them for questions. And usually whoever is best situated to answer the question is usually the person who jumps in and answers the question. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, well, not finally, but close to finally, and most importantly, you're going to do what's called making the ask. And so if your goal is, for instance, for them to agree to, say, vote for the legislation, your ask is going to be, we would really like to get your vote for this legislation. Can we count on you to vote for this legislation? Or maybe it's to have them bring it up in committee, or maybe it's to sponsor it, or maybe it's to co-sponsor it. But whatever it is, you want to put something to them. You want to put a question to them before you walk out of the office. You at least want to make them answer the question. You may not get the answer that you wanted, but you want to at least put them on the record as much as you possibly can. Then you're going to thank them for their time. And then at the end, you're going to say, do you mind if we take a photo with you? And as one of my colleagues always says, if you don't take a picture, the meeting never happens. So you should try to get a picture because it's a record. It's another way of recording the meeting. You have kind of two ways. You have the note taker has taken all the notes about what happened in the meeting, what the questions were, and things like that. One last thing I'll say is there will be times that a legislator will ask you questions that you might not know the answer to, or that someone in the room might not know the answer to. Instead of trying to give the wrong answer or to guess what the answer is, you should always say, we will get back to you with that answer, and then you should follow up. That's really important, that if you tell them you're going to follow up with an answer, that you do follow up with an answer, then go find out what the answer is and follow up. So that's the basic thing. There's the next slide, I think, is, yeah, tips for the meeting. So as I said before, legislators care most about their constituents. Those are the most important person in the meeting. Almost everyone else in the meeting could basically disappear as long as the constituent gets to tell their story and talk to their legislator. That's the main reason why you're in the room. I'm not saying that everyone else in the room isn't important. I'm saying that the most important person is the constituent.
Yeah, if I can add something to that component as
Sure,
well.
Candia.
So most of these meetings you will be in with your fellow constituents. But if it happens that you are in meetings where you're amongst folks within from other states, allow them the courtesy, to Josh's point, to be the focal point of the meeting. So often we've gone into meetings where people who are not from the state are making a lot of the comments and have taken up the air in the room. And so while this won't be the case for this upcoming meeting where you'll largely be in with your fellow constituents of the senators, in other meetings, you may be in mixed company, and please extend that courtesy in those meetings to the constituent.
Another warning is a lot of times something that I've always called the pit of doom happens, where someone starts talking. Basically what you're trying to do is tell whatever your story is in 2 to 3 minutes maximum. And you should practice that in advance. But every once in a while you'll get in a room. Actually, this happens almost every time I go with groups of people. There'll at least be one time where this happens, where someone will start talking and they just can't stop talking. And so what I generally suggest is that the group ahead of time sets some kind of signal so that everybody knows what the signal is for when it's time to wrap up. Because the worst thing, as Candia was just saying, is when someone starts talking, doesn't stop talking, and it means a bunch of people in the room never get to say anything to their own representative, because you only have 15 to 20 minutes. You definitely want to practice in advance. You want to get your stories done in 2 to 3 minutes, and you want to make sure that if you're going over that, you know how someone else can tell you that you're going over, and you'll recognize that. So have kind of a signal for that. The next thing is legislators are moved by stories. I already talked about that. You definitely should be telling stories. That's the most important thing, I think. Look for common ground. We know you need to think ahead. What does this person care about? I talked earlier, and Candia talked earlier, about researching and finding out what these people are really about, what really moves them. There's a lot of information online about that kind of stuff. But, just to get an example from my own personal preferences, I rarely will walk into an office or support legislation unless I have a good story for why that legislation is good for public safety. Because I believe, and I'm not sure everybody does, but this is something I believe, is that most people won't support a bill, no matter what the good reasons for it are, if they think that it's bad for public safety. So you have to have a story for why it's good for public safety. So I always start my work of thinking about my bill from why is this good for public safety? Why will this help our communities be safer? That's just my approach to it. A lot of people do it different ways, but that's the way I look at it. You should talk about it as a bipartisan issue. What that just means is it's something that everybody, no matter what their political background is, can agree on. And we're trying to find agreement between, and I could talk a long time about bipartisanship, but I will tell you this, it is very hard in most legislators to pass legislation without support from both sides of the aisle. And in places where there's a supermajority, a lot of those places are Republican supermajorities. It's very hard to pass legislation unless you have the support of the Republicans in states that have Republican majorities and supermajorities. So you have to get practice in the idea of why would everyone agree with this bill? You need to start thinking about it as something that's bipartisan, something that would reach across the aisle, something that everyone can get behind. Public safety, for example, is an example of something that is a bipartisan issue. The other thing is that you should be respectful. You should always assume everyone is operating in good faith, even if they're really not. You just have to go into it as an advocate and try to do the best you can, assuming that you're going to have impact and extend as much courtesy to other people as possible, because again, you're trying to build relationships. Next. Yeah, be pointed and concise. I already talked about that, 2 to 3 minutes max. The next one. Don't be discouraged if you're meeting with legislative staff. This is really important. Staff, a lot of times, are equally, if not more important than legislators, because a lot of times it's the staff that drives what the legislative agenda is. And on top of that, if you're building relationships, no matter who you're meeting with, what you're trying to do is get a foothold in that office and to build something where they're going to remember you, you're going to remember them, and the next time, and the next time, and the next time. That's what you're trying to build toward. All right, and I think that's the end of my portion, and I'm very happy to pass it to my frequent tag team partner, Candia.
All righty. Thank you, Josh. We usually do that training together. I would say Josh did a great job going at it alone. Really detailed, much information, and he came sharp today too. So that if you're wondering why I'm wearing a jacket, is because Josh had on that cool shirt, and I figured to throw on something, a little something too. So great job, Josh. So let's talk a little bit about what we'll be advocating for during this virtual lobby day. But before we go there, I just want to say, what's critical to advancing legislation in DC is having trusted partners. It's important to be in relationship with both likely and unlikely allies in order to advance, public policy here in DC. And she thought she was going to get away and go unnoticed. We have one of our partners here today, Jillian Williams, who's with the Global Health Advocacy Incubator. And so we're very grateful for that partnership. She thought she was going to slide in and slide out without us saying something. And so we appreciate you being here, and we appreciate the partnership that we've enjoyed actually over the last couple of months, and looking forward to advancing a lot of the bills that we're going to talk about today. But the other thing, as Josh talked about, it's important is you all. If your ears were ringing as Empathy Network leaders, it's because I was talking just earlier today with a prospective funder on the fact that we're not able to move legislation without you and your involvement. You've been important to every piece of legislation we've moved, whether it be the CARES Act home confinement issue and advancing that policy, the Keep Them Home with respect to CARES Act, as well as the federal prison oversight. And so, as we talk about these initiatives today, know that our investment in you is out of recognition of how important you are to this process. Now, the reason I say federal initiatives is because, you're accustomed to working with us. Those of you who worked with us in the past are accustomed to working with us with respect to specific legislation we're looking to advance. In this case, we're also looking to advance some legislation, but also fight back against some cuts to Medicaid. And so we're going to talk about defending Medicaid, and want to talk about a couple of bullet points relative, or talking points relative to defending Medicaid. Many of you may know that the U.S. House of Representatives, they have a budget resolution that proposes to cut Medicaid by $880 billion. And while some estimates say that it would, I would say, reduce or should I say, result in a loss of 1 million jobs, 113 billion decline in state's gross domestic product, and $8.8 billion loss to state and local revenues in 2026 alone. And so as much as it'll do that, it also has a public health and public safety nexus to the cuts, which is what we are going to talk about. And so as we talk about these different bullet points, we want to talk about them from both the public health and public safety perspective. We know that protecting Medicaid helps with preventive care, right? Many of us who have returned from our incarceration have depended on Medicaid. It helps to reduce recidivism. We know that it also helps and it provides critical support for folks who are suffering from addiction, and helps to reduce overdose. In fact, states who have expanded Medicaid have seen both a reduction in overdose deaths and increase in addiction treatments, as well as we've seen reduction in recidivism amongst those states that have expanded Medicaid. And so we want to, one, protect Medicaid, but also, as we talk about legislation in the Reentry Act, even expand Medicaid going forward. Next slide. The other piece of legislation we're looking to advance is the Clean Slate Act. Many of you are familiar with its passage in the states. And for those of you who are not familiar with the legislation, it aims to seal certain criminal records after a certain period of time. And so if it's a misdemeanor, it seeks to seal those records after 3 years. If it's a felony, it seeks to seal those records after 8 years, assuming that you're crime free for that period of time. And so we have talking points relative to that. There's some nuances to that legislation. That's why I say certain crimes. And so this bill is led by Lisa Blunt Rochester in the Senate, as well as Rand Paul. Lisa Blunt Rochester is the Democrat on the bill. Rand Paul is a Republican in the Senate. And then on the House side, Lucy McBath is the Democrat on the bill. And we are in search of a Republican lead on the House side. So stay tuned for that. And hopefully out of this effort, we can find a Republican lead on the House side. Now, what's the public safety nexus to it, right? It promotes housing stability, as well as economic dignity when it comes to access to jobs. And we know that both housing stability and secure jobs help to reduce recidivism. The next bill is the Fair Future Act. An amendment commonly known as the Thurmond Amendment was added to the Fair Housing Act in 1988. And so what the Fair Future Act will do is repeal this amendment. Now, what is the Thurmond Amendment? The Thurmond Amendment, what it does is it allows for landlords and banks to discriminate against people with certain drug convictions. And so that's both distribution and manufacturing. So you can be discriminated against with respect to housing. And so what this law does is it repeals that amendment. And what's interesting about this bill and how far reaching this bill is, or should I say the Thurmond Amendment is that whether you have a felony or misdemeanor, you lose all of your housing protections if it's a drug conviction. And so we seek to repeal the Thurmond Amendment and restore housing rights for people with drug felony convictions. The third bill is the Reentry Act, which allows, as Amanda talked about earlier today, which allows folks who have access to Medicaid, or should I say those who are reentering 30 days before their reentry, allow them to have access to Medicaid before they are released from their incarceration. I talked up front about the importance of Medicaid and how it helps to reduce crime and provide social and safety net services. And so those would be the talking points that certainly we would apply to the Reentry Act as well. We anticipate that bill, Jillian, is going to be reintroduced next week. Is that?
Yep, that's correct. It's dropping next week.
Yeah, it's dropping next week with a whole host of bipartisan support. I haven't seen the do you have a sense of the bipartisan support it's going to drop with next week?
Yes, I can't remember the exact breakdown, but so far we have over 65 co-sponsors in the House. And that is a bipartisan breakdown as well. And that's not just like one Republican and the rest are Democrats. It's like it's a pretty good proportion.
That's my understanding. And we should have, hopefully we'll have the numbers by the time we meet with our legislators. And so I think that concludes the breakdowns of the bills. Is that it for me?
Yes,
Harrison?
sir. Yeah.
All right. Did I get it within 3 minutes per?
You did. You did
All right.
an excellent job being concise
first time.
and to the point. We have this back and forth because Josh and Candia are some of our most loquacious wordsmiths that we have on staff. But we love them for it, and we love to razz them.
I beat him this time.
All right, folks. Well, we're going to get into the...
I mean, you did have like 20 less slides than I did.
I think I set him up. Did I, Harrison? I set him up to be longer this time.
You did. You had executive control of the rules. But next time, maybe you can flip-flop, who does next week. So I'll leave it up to y'all. So we're going to get into the simulation portion of this training, and we really appreciate you all being on for nearly an hour already. But before we get into the activity portion of this workshop, I want to offer some quick reminders for everybody that's going to be joining us for the virtual lobby day on April 9th. For those that have not heard back about meeting, scheduling the particular time that you're going to be hopping on with your representatives in Congress and Senate, just prepare your calendar. Like Josh referenced earlier, meetings generally last anywhere between 15, 20, 25 minutes, and they will take place between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern. If there's any time that you cannot join, just contact our staff and we'll make sure to note it in our tracker. And, lobbying is more fun with friends, as well as family, people in your community that care about these issues, they're impacted by them. So make sure to invite them. You can share this recording with them. You can connect them with staff to receive a little bit of mentorship. There's strength in numbers, especially when it comes to, voices of people that have been touched by these issues directly. And before we get into the simulation formally, I want to kick it over to Tori to promote an emergency webinar that we're running tomorrow. So Tori, please.
Yeah, so Candia kind of we've been touching all day about the importance of Medicaid and public health and access to health and jobs. And so as part of that, we're going to be hosting a webinar tomorrow to go over this budget process. You've probably heard the word reconciliation. You might be like, what is that? And so this will teach us what the congressional budgetary process will look like, as well as the actionable next steps that we could take to help fight for the Inflation Reduction Act and Medicaid, kind of two issues that really promote jobs and health and justice. And so that's tomorrow at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. It's only an hour, so I know we've taken up a lot of your time today. But if you want to continue to do work to help really fight for access to health, I highly recommend you joining this webinar to kind of learn what the congressional budget is going to be looking like in the next month and how you could plug yourself in to mobilize for it. And so I'm going to drop the invite here. For those of you who've already signed on, we'll see you tomorrow and then here's the link if you want to join in.
Excellent. Thank you. And huge shout out to Tori and our team, folks like Berna, other members of our staff who turned around and put this together in really short order. So really appreciate your all's dedication and hard work on that. Now we're going to get into the lobbying exercise, and we're going to be talking about defending Medicaid with 3 elected officials. So we're actually going to be in 4 rooms. 2 of the rooms are going to be the same elected official, and you're going to be talking to Josh, Amanda, Tori, and Candia, who will be role playing as these elected officials. So for the first 10 minutes, you're going to be deciding amongst yourselves, what role you want to embody, whether that's leader, a storyteller, or somebody who's just a general advocate, and then decide who's going to be a note taker. So maybe open up a Google Doc, or get out a pen and pad if that's your thing. And then you're going to be dividing up research responsibilities using the one-pager, blog, and senator bios that we've provided in the exercise sheet that Tori will be dropping in the chat shortly. And then for the remainder of the time, you're going to be practicing lobbying our staff legislator on defending Medicaid and the importance of preserving this institution that we have in this country. And then whatever time you have left after you thank your senator, Congressman Ho, Congressman Milton, and receiving some feedback, talking about how the process went, and as you go along, they may be providing just like a little bit of instructions if you're a little greener to this. Although we have some advocates who've done this plenty of times in the audience, and they can help spearhead things, move them along. So without further ado, I think Tori has cut up the breakout rooms. Click that link that you see in the chat now while it's handy, and that will open up the instructions. And we'll come back here. Yeah, here's the simulation right here. We'll come back here with the remainder of our time once we come back, just to talk about how the process went, and then we'll adjourn. So, Tori.
And
please,
depending
let's-
on which room you're in, that will be the legislator that your person you'll want to research about. So just make note of that. But I'm opening the rooms right now.
Alrighty, folks. See you in a bit. Welcome back, folks. Hope that was kind of fun. Maybe a little uncomfortable. How did that go? Would love to hear from a few volunteers.
I just
Non-staff.
lost. I was in the middle of talking to Candia and I lost him. So
She was doing great though.
Are you making the ask now? Do you want to
She was on a
ask
roll.
in front of all these
I
constituents?
was on a roll, says Candia.
Yeah, she was like butter on a roll there.
Oh,
Well-
now I lost.
Is it Renee? Is that how you pronounce it?
That's correct. Yep. My parents just had a different way of spelling it, I guess.
Would you like to share a little bit about what the experience was like?
First of all, Candia is a great teacher and he's got so much knowledge and I'm so excited to learn from him. But I was incarcerated. And so I do not know firsthand what it's like to come out of prison and not have medical care. I was lucky enough to still have my husband, my kids, all those things, but I have so many people that I met and am proud to call my friends, and they had nothing when they came out. And it's so important for recidivism. It's so important for us as Americans to make sure that we all have access to that health care. And we want to lower recidivism. So if we can get people on the right track on their health meds, on their mental health meds when they get out, it's just vital that we do that. So I can say a lot more, but I don't want to take up everybody's time. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Renee.
Yep.
Can we get a volunteer to share a little bit more about how the experience was for them? Maybe somebody that has never done this before, or maybe somebody who's seasoned who wants to share.
Is
something about
Sabrina,
their-
is Sabrina on this call?
Yeah,
Make her
Sabrina,
talk.
you're being called on.
How dare you? I'm at the gym. Um, no,
Hey, girl.
I thought, hi. No, I thought this was great. It was very familiar because of the Dream Fellowship. So that was familiar, but I think going through these, oh yeah, I think going through these little simulations is so important because when you put on a spot like that, you know, you don't think of it. Like the first thing I was like, well, I've never had Medicaid, but then I was like, wait a second, there's all these people coming out of prison that don't have you know, I know a ton of people that have suffered with this. And not only that, we have this fentanyl crisis. And the last thing you want is for people to start self-medicating because they don't have access to health. So anyway, but I think the simulations are so important to get back into that practice because it brings out, you know, your analytical thinking and that being able to put that together. Obviously, we suck on the first go, but you know, whatever. But I think it's incredibly helpful, and I think it's a lot of fun too. Thanks, Renee.
No problem, Sabrina. But I know how well versed you are on this. So
Thank you for sharing, Sabrina. If anybody needs to run, I know we're over time. Please feel free. Would love to just hear from Shauna before we wrap up. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about your experience.
Of course, thank you. Yeah, it was awesome. I don't have a lot of experience with any of this. I've been to Sacramento once, kind of tagging along with Initiate Justice for a meet and greet with the newly elected representatives, and I've done a couple of the webinars with Dream. I've done a couple of interviews for the cohort coming up, hoping to be accepted. And it was awesome. I took the role of the lived experience constituent and crafted my message, kind of leaning towards the right side of moral grounds, and came at him from a point of view of like it being the right thing to do. So people can have a leg up, not a handout, and hitting all those kinds of keys. I did pretty well with my responses to the questions that were asked, but I do need to spend more time figuring out how to say tax the billionaires in a right-leaning receivable message form. So that'll work. And then they offered me some data points that I haven't been exposed to before, so I can incorporate those moving forward and stuff. And it was just really cool experience. I am just getting into this. I want to be a lobbyist. I want to be like a communications director or something along those lines for social justice, criminal justice, whatever, just fixing our broken system. And this was a really amazing time, just a really cool experience to kind of role play it, you know, before you actually go and do it. So yeah, it was good. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Shauna.
Harrison,
I saw you just. Yeah, please.
I was in a group with her, and I would have never thought this was her first time. Like, she was on point. She was like, you just felt her energy of what she was saying. So I just want to give her a props because she came in there. Jillian asked her a hard question. Josh asked her a hard question, and she answered them. So yeah, she did great. So I just don't want her to underplay it a little bit. I want to give her credit.
Thank you, Sheena. I really appreciate that. I do have a fellow colleague on this call, Gina Quiros. I work with her. So she is also an amazing advocate. I was not in her team, but I have had the privilege of speaking to city council with a group of us, and I know her ability herself. So I'm pretty sure she can probably add a little cool stories from her group in here also.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Shauna. This was the most learning experience that I've had in such a short time, to be honest. It was great.
Love to hear it. All right, folks. Well, I'm going to move us to wrap.